Hey guys, tonight, we're headed somewhere you probably don't expect to find icelet, alone, iced desserts. Imagine you're deep in the arid heart of ancient Persia. The sun has scorched the landscape all day, painting everything in shades of rust and gold. The air is still radiating heat long after sunset. The sand feels like it might sizzle beneath your feet. And yet, someone somehow is quietly eating something cold. Not lukewarm, not a little cool from the shade, but genuinely icy, sorbet even. You blink. You're not hallucinating. This is real, and you probably wouldn't survive a week here without a very solid plan for shade and water. But hey, that's why you're just visiting tonight. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're settling in from somewhere unusual, post your location and local time in the comments. Always fun to know which time zones are drifting off with me. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive in the Persian Empire, somewhere around the 5th century BCE, maybe earlier. The dates are fuzzy, like so many things in sleepy history. But what's not fuzzy is the air. It's dry, crackling, still holding on to the day's heat, even though the sun has long since slipped behind the distant Zagros mountains. You're walking toward a village that looks as if it's been drawn in charcoal. Tan adobe walls, low domes, everything muted and wind-blown. And then, that smell. You catch something on the breeze. Rosewater, sugar, and could it be a chill? You follow the scent and the whisper of coolness through a courtyard, under a shaded archway, past camels who glance up like they know you're out of place here. You step into a shaded hall, and there, lounging as if the heat doesn't exist, a nobleman dips a spoon into a glass bowl. Inside, thin frozen threads glistening with syrup and perfumed with saffron. You stare. He laughs. "Ah, you don't have this where you're from, do you?" he says, raising an eyebrow. "We call it faluda. Want to try?" And just like that, you're in the center of a cold mystery in a hot land. Ancient Persia, also known as the Achaemenid Empire, was one of the great powers of the ancient world. At its height, it stretched from the Indus Valley in the east to the edge of Greece in the west. But it wasn't just a warrior kingdom. These were administrators, architects, engineers, artists and, apparently, dessert connoisseurs. The capital cities like Persepolis weren't just centers of politics and pageantry. They were also hotbeds of culinary experimentation, including something we're going to lovingly obsess over for the next 2 hours. How these clever people, living in one of the world's driest regions, managed to not only preserve ice, but use it to make desserts that could outchill anything in your freezer. Historians are still arguing, by the way, about whether the Persians truly invented ice storage or simply perfected ideas that had been around for centuries. There's evidence that ancient Mesopotamians may have stored snow, and the Chinese certainly played with frozen treats, but it's the Persians who gave it architectural drama. But back to your spoon. The taste is light, floral, just a little tangy, not quite sherbet, not quite noodle soup. The nobleman watches you with mild amusement, then gestures to a servant who brings in a large flat slab of something that glistens in the torchlight. Ice, actual ice, carved and carted from who knows where. It rests on a tray like a rare jewel. It's melting fast, but no one seems too concerned. This is a feast. They'll use every bit of it before it turns to mere water. You, of course, can't help but wonder, how did they get ice here? How did they keep it? And that, my friend, is where your sleepy little adventure begins. You step back into the night, curiosity tugging at your dusty sandals. The moon is high now, the stars spread wide and thin over the desert. Someone points to a pale shape on the horizon, half pyramid, half beehive, glowing faintly in the dark. That, they whisper, is where we keep the cold. It looks like something left behind by a much older civilization. Maybe aliens, maybe camel-worshipping time travelers. But no, this is human ingenuity at its driest, most determined, most desert-motivated. You make your way toward it, feeling the night cool at last. Sand slips beneath your feet, and a faint breeze brushes past. Somewhere behind you, someone is still eating sorbet. You're about to meet the Axel the Ice House, not just a storage unit, but a symbol, a scientific statement, a culinary flex. As you walk, you imagine the thousand small decisions that went into it. How far down should we dig? How thick should the walls be? How do we shade it from the sun and still keep it accessible? What do we tell the goat herder who keeps sneaking in to lick the walls? And most importantly, is there enough left to chill tomorrow's dessert? You finally arrive at the foot of the strange dome. It's larger than it seemed from the village, roughly the height of a 2-story house, though its shape is unusual, like a giant clay gumdrop dropped from the sky. The base is wide and flared, the top tapering off to a narrow vent that seems to whisper into the night. This is your first up-close look at a Yakchal, the ancient Persian ice pit. You reach out and press your palm against the wall. It's cool, not just cooler than the air, but startlingly so, like touching stone. In a shadowy cave, the exterior is made of a thick, mud brick-like material called saruja, mixture of clay, lime, sand, and goat hair. It sounds like a toddler's DIY kit, but it's genius. Completely waterproof, heat-resistant, and durable enough to survive centuries. You circle the structure slowly, ducking to avoid the breeze as it snakes in from the desert. Small air vents dot the base, some open, some sealed with wooden plugs. You're not alone. A few sleepy laborers are still tending to the site even at night, sweeping sand away from the lower steps, inspecting cracks in the plaster. One man is slowly rotating a copper ladle over a brazier, making tea but not drinking it. The ice sleeps better when we do, he says with a wink. You find the entrance, a squat arched doorway that leads downward, and downward, and downward. Stone steps spiral deep into the earth, because of course they do. You grip the sides of the stairwell as you descend, noticing how the air changes. With every step, it grows cooler. Not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually, like slipping into a bath where the temperature adjusts around you. Your footsteps echo faintly. It's quiet down here, but not silent. You hear the occasional drip, a breeze curling through the vent above, maybe a soft rustle of mice deciding which sack of ice to nibble on tonight. When you reach the bottom, your jaw drops. Well, it would, if you weren't already yawning a little. The chamber is vast. Rounded walls form a dome above you, and in the center is a sunken pit, lined with dark, smooth stone. Inside the pit, ice, layers of it, packed, cut, and carefully stored. Some of it still glistens like fresh snow. Other parts have the blue-gray hue of something that's been frozen for weeks. There's a ladder, leaned against one side of the pit, and a boy, maybe 12, is scraping thin slivers of ice into a clay jar. For the vizier's pomegranate syrup, he says softly, not even looking at you. He says it helps with his headaches. I think he just likes to slurp it when no one's watching. Historians still debate just how effective these Yakchals were across the year. Some argue they could preserve ice through scorching summers. Others think they were mostly used to store winter-harvested ice through the spring, when the weather wasn't quite as punishing. Either way, what you're witnessing is a marvel of engineering, passive refrigeration in the middle of a desert. You reach out toward the pit. The air here feels like a mild spring morning in a shaded orchard, a little humid, a little crisp, but entirely out of place in the Iranian plateau's brutal summer climate. The trick, of course, isn't just the dome or the depth, it's everything working together. The saruj insulation, the orientation of the Yakchal to minimize direct sunlight, the narrow vents that promote convection currents, even the placement near prevailing desert winds helps funnel cool air downward while pushing warm air out the top. It's not one innovation, it's a dozen tiny, dusty, brilliant ones stacked together like bricks in a wall. You sit on the edge of the pit. The laborers don't seem to mind. One of them pours you tea, lukewarm, but strangely perfect for this moment. You sip. The steam coils upward lazily, disappearing into the cool night. There's no electric hum, no refrigerator buzz, just the gentle drip of condensation, the hush of air moving past stone, the quiet comfort of an ancient system, doing its job better than you'd expect. It's humbling, really. Thousands of years before your energy-efficient freezer complained about too many frozen pizzas, these engineers were harvesting seasonal ice and making it last long enough to chill grape syrup in the palace courtyard. And while modern archaeologists still piece together how Yakchals were first developed, who built the earliest versions, which dynasty funded their spread across Persia, there's no denying their elegance. They weren't hidden technologies. Villagers knew where the ice was. Kids snuck down here to cool their hands. Servants collected shards to serve with honey and melon. Some of the Yakchals had attached cisterns or channels that allowed meltwater to be reused for irrigation or even cooled again overnight in shallow pools. And while you sit here, legs swinging gently over the edge of the pit, you begin to understand the bigger picture. This wasn't just about desert, it was about control, the ability to tame nature, to shape comfort out of chaos. In a landscape of extremes, brutal heat, bitter winters, unpredictable rains, this dome of chillness is both luxury and logic, a symbol of power, a promise that even the sun can be outsmarted. You finish your tea and set the cup down beside you. Somewhere above, a camel snorts. Maybe it's dreaming of frozen cactus sorbet. Probably not. One of the older workers begins to hum a lullaby as he brushes dust from a jar lid. His voice bounces off the walls softly, gently. You feel your eyelids droop just a little. You're still at the beginning of this story. But already, the desert doesn't feel quite so harsh. After all, if ice can survive, here maybe you can too. You're still in the cool belly of the Yakchil, and now, curiosity begins to nudge you away from just what is inside it, toward how it all got here. Ice doesn't exactly fall from the sky in Persia, at least, not often. So, where did it come from? You climb back up the spiral steps slowly, savoring the last hints of chill as you re-emerge into the warm breath of the desert night. Outside, the stars blink in place. One of the workers joins you, an older man with a beard like twisted rope and eyebrows permanently furrowed. Perhaps from decades of listening to sand complain in the wind. He gestures to the distant mountains. That's where it begins, he says simply. Turns out, those innocent-looking slopes weren't just dramatic scenery, they were seasonal lifelines. During winter, the mountains would gather snow, sometimes generously, sometimes barely enough to coat a camel's hump. Come late winter or early spring, laborers, often a combination of servants, local farmers, and conscripted workers, would hike up with baskets, tarps, and pure, stubborn determination. And yes, sometimes they just packed snow into jars and carried it down. But often, they built temporary trenches and channels to slide the snow down to the foothills, letting gravity do the hauling. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't fun, but it was weirdly effective, at least when goats weren't eating the sled. Runners, you can almost imagine it, a group of bundled men, slipping and swearing, coaxing half-melted slush downhill like an angry snowman migration. And if they managed to do it early enough in the season while the nights were still cold, they could then transfer the collected snow into shaded pools at the base of the Yakchil. Here's where things get really clever. The bottom of many Yakchils wasn't just a dry pit, it doubled as a mini ice factory. In the stillness of a desert winter night, with temperatures dipping just low enough, shallow pools of water would be poured into stone basins and left to freeze naturally. And not just once, night after night. The ice would layer up, like geological pastry. The thicker it got, the more it could survive the coming heat. Historians still argue whether Persians relied more on snow hauling or nighttime freezing to create their ice stores. The truth is probably both, depending on the region and how generous the mountain gods were feeling that year. You walk now along the edge of one such basin-wide, shallow depression that looks like an empty fountain. A thin layer of frost still clings to the edges, stubborn even in the desert air. This one was filled 2 weeks ago. Your guide mutters, still has some bite. He kicks at the ground, revealing a few splinters of cracked ice. You kneel and touch one thin, delicate, already melting against your skin. But here's the thing, they'd do this again and again, night after night, carefully building up ice that was thicker than your patience on a hot day without wi-fi. Then came the insulation, not just architectural, but practical. After gathering a decent stash of frozen treasure, workers would cover the ice with layers of straw, burlap, or even dried reeds. Sometimes they'd alternate layers of ice and straw, like lasagna built, for longevity. And this brings you to another tiny, delightful fact. Not all ice was equal. There were class layers here. Literally, the topmost layer, exposed to the most temperature changes, was considered less pure, good for servants, or livestock, or on very generous days soldiers. But the inner layers, especially those frozen first and insulated best, that was the good stuff, reserved for nobles, governors, or anyone with the right mix of titles and bribes. Of course, not every bit of ice was for eating. Some was used medicinally, applied to fevers, sprains, or swollen joints. One ancient physician's notes, scratched into clay tablets now lost to time, supposedly recommended placing a cube of pure mountain snow between the brows to silence the screams of spirits. Whether that meant migraines or in-laws, no one's quite sure. And just when you think this ancient cold chain couldn't get more impressive, your guide squints toward the far end of the basin and says, "You know, some villagers even built walls just to cast longer shadows." You blink. That's oddly poetic, but he's serious. To help the freezing process during marginally cold nights, Persians constructed low mud brick walls around their ice basins, angled just right to shade water from the sun while encouraging airflow, not to protect from enemies, not to display wealth, just to trick water into becoming ice a few hours faster. It's hard not to feel a quiet respect for this level of dedication. You're used to weather apps and ice makers that complain when you open the freezer door too long. These people moved snow down cliffs, built earth domes from scratch, and then shaded puddles just so desert could crunch when chewed. And speaking of dessert, you hear it again, that faint sound of bowls clinking, syrup being poured, laughter echoing across the village square. Desert time is serious business. Don't you follow the sound back toward the communal area? People have gathered under the night sky, reclining on woven mats. A young girl offers you a shallow ceramic dish. Inside is a delicate rose-hued sorbet, topped with crushed pistachios and scented so gently, it's almost like memory more than flavor. You take a bite, and even though the ice came from melted snow, hauled by barefoot teenagers and frozen in dusty basins, it tastes clean, elegant, cold in a way that feels ancient. And that's when you realize, this isn't just engineering, this is ritual, this is tradition turned into architecture, ice turned into identity. You might forget their emperors, their battles, their maps, but you will remember the moment your tongue met a 2,500-year-old snowflake under the stars, and somewhere, in the distance, a yakshal hums like a quiet animal, content, cold, and dreaming of winter. You're still savoring the last cold echo of rosewater sorbet when someone nearby begins sketching something into the sand. You wander over, bowl in hand, and peek over his shoulder. What he's drawing looks oddly mathematical: arcs, angles, lines slicing across a dome. At first, you think it's a new game or a dreamy doodle, but then he nods at the sketch and says, "This is how you freeze water when the sun wants to kill you." You're about to laugh, but he's completely serious. You kneel down beside him, and soon you're tracing your finger along the curves of the diagram. It's not just a picture of a yakshal, it's the plan how every part of it works together, how geometry and wind and sheer stubbornness turn the desert into a walk-in freezer. Turns out, the yakshal isn't just cold, it's clever. First off, that dome isn't just there for show. Its shape is aerodynamic. The round, tapering curve resists wind pressure and helps create an internal convection system. Warm air inside rises naturally and escapes through the narrow chimney-like vent at the top. Cooler air sinks and stays trapped below. Think of it as nature's lazy fan, slow, quiet, but persistent. You press your hand to the sand drawing, mimicking the path of that warm air as it drifts upward and vanishes. It's almost poetic. Hot air always seems to want to go away. Then there's the wall thickness. We're not talking drywall here. Yakshal walls were sometimes over 6 feet thick, at the base made from that magical sarouge blend of clay, ash, lime, egg whites, and goat hair. Why goat hair? Because apparently, desert goats give excellent insulation advice. The sarouge mixture was water-resistant, insect-resistant, and heat-reflective. It didn't just keep the ice cold, kept the hot out. Think of it as the ancient Persian version of do not disturb. Your new friend draws a little sun in the corner of the diagram and chuckles. The sun tries, he mutters, but we try harder. And it's not just about keeping things cold inside. It's about bringing more cold in, naturally, quietly, all while tricking physics into going along with it. That's where the wind catchers come in. You walk a short distance to a smaller structure beside the main yakshal wind tower, or bag. It looks like a chimney flipped upside down. Slits along its sides catch passing desert breezes, funneling the air downward through vertical shafts. The effect: instant air conditioning, no plug required. You stand beside it and feel the breeze rush past, chilled slightly as it brushes over moist surfaces inside the shaft. It's not icy, but it's cooler than the air around it tanned in this climate. Every degree counts. Historians still debate whether these wind towers were used exclusively with yakshals or more commonly in homes and palaces, but there's enough overlap to suspect that yes, someone eventually had the bright idea to pair these breezy chimneys with their chilly domes. a match made in desert heaven. Your fingers trail along the edge of the wind tower's base. It's rough, sun-baked, but solid, still standing after centuries of storms and temperature swings. Modern concrete would be jealous. And then there's the orientation of everything. You hadn't noticed until now, but the yachtl you visited earlier, its entrance was shaded, always. You wander back and see that the entire structure is built, with its opening facing north. Why? Because in the northern hemisphere, that's where sunlight is least aggressive. South-facing walls absorb heat. North-facing walls shrugged it off, even when they're shaped like beehives. Little details, big chill. As you step back and look at the bigger picture, the entire system begins to unfold in your mind. Shaded basins to freeze water, tall domes to trap coolness, wind catchers to stir the air. Insulation so thick and primitive it outlasts modern roof tiles. Every piece hums with quiet logic. You imagine what it must have been like to design the first one. No blueprints, no weather models, just trial and error, bricks and sweat. Maybe a little arguing with your uncle about the angle of the vents, but eventually, it worked. The most beautiful part, once built, it costs nothing to run. No coal, no firewood, no electricity. Just a little faith in geometry and nighttime temperatures. Someone offers you another cup of tea. You take it, then smile when they slip a sliver of ice into it. With dramatic flair, it cracks against the clay cup with a satisfying pop. You sip. The contrast between heat and chill is delightful, and oddly symbolic. This is the magic of Persian engineering. Not just that it works, but that it works with style. You notice now that other buildings in the village borrow bits and pieces of yachtl wisdom. Thicker walls here, north-facing, windows there, wind vents carved into even the smallest huts. The technology wasn't confined to the ice house, it spread, quietly, like a cool whisper through history. Some architects today still study yachtls for sustainable design inspiration, and while modern HVAC systems might laugh at mud domes, the truth is, they don't last 400 years. Your guide smiles, as if reading your thoughts. We built them to keep things cold, he says, but they keep our stories warm. You glance, once more, at the wing catcher. A bird is perched on its ledge, wings ruffling gently in the breeze. It seems perfectly content, and so, strangely, are you. It's late afternoon now. The sun is still high, but the edges of the sky are beginning to melt into amber and dust. You're walking slowly, content, your mind filled with geometric domes, freezing basins, wind tunnels, and ice from another century. Then you hear a sound, grunts, hooves, a wheel creaking under a heavy load. You turn a corner, and there it is, a caravan of men guiding a bullock cart with a massive block of ice wrapped in layers of straw, burlap, and cloth. It's sweating gently in the heat, drops glistening like pearls along the wooden edges of the cart. You fall in beside them. They're making a delivery, they tell you. An elite merchant's daughter is to be married, and nothing says wealth quite like iced desserts in the summer. You ask if this happens often. One man laughs, only when someone's showing off. And just like that, you realize, cold wasn't just about survival, it was about status. In a world without freezers, having ice in summer was like flying in your own private chariot. It meant you had resources, reach, and the patience to protect something ephemeral. You followed the caravan, through dusty alleyways, and arrive at a large home with carved wooden doors and walls painted with vines and birds. Inside, a shaded courtyard holds trays of fruits, nuts, dried roses, and clay pots of what looks like frozen noodles floating in syrup. Faluda, someone offers. Try it. You do, and everything about it. The texture, the cold shock. The syrup feels like a collision between desert and memory. Sweet, fragrant, and bizarrely ancient. It's like eating the history of ice itself. As you chew the chilled vermicelli, someone leans over and whispers, "This is what kings used to dream of." You believe them. They explain how the block of ice was carved days ago, stored in the depths of a yachtl, wrapped and rewrapped to survive the journey. A courier rode ahead to prepare the kitchen. It's a full operation, a ritual. And this was entertainment. Cold wasn't just comfort, it was performance, theater, prestige. The wedding guests gather to watch the unveiling of the deserts, as if it were a coronation. When the clay pot is cracked open and steam rises off the sorbet's surface, there's actual applause. A few children gasped at one boy, emboldened, grabs a chunk of ice and hurls it across the courtyard. It shatters against a wall, sending shards skittering like stars. A snowball fight breaks out, brief, chaotic, hilarious. For 5 minutes, it feels like winter in July. The father of the bride watches with pride. He hasn't just thrown a wedding, he's conjured a miracle. You overhear him say, "This is how people will remember it." And you realize he's right. Back outside, the ice cart now sits empty. Meltwater drips off the wooden slats, forming a dark trail back through the alleyway. The oxen look relieved. You thank the driver. He shrugs. "It's not the ice," he says. "It's how long you kept it." The sentiment echoes strangely in your head. You're learning that in ancient Persia, ice was more than temperature. It was time. The ability to preserve something fleeting, a piece of night carried into the day, a memory made tangible, then slowly allowed to melt. As the sun sets, you walk past another yakchil, its dome catching the last golden rays. A worker is sealing its door, shut with fresh mortar, locking away the season's harvest. He sees you, watching, and grins. "We won't open it again until the world forgets how hot it is." Then he wipes his hands, picks up his tools, and disappears into the shadowed streets. The yakchil looms behind him, silent, still, and perfectly cool. You're standing now at the edge of a vast garden, a bog, they call it. A Persian walled garden, heavy with the scent of jasmine and cypress, and echoing with the soft gurgle of water channels, weaving like silver veins through beds of pomegranate and fig. You step inside, and instantly the temperature drops, not dramatically, but perceptibly. The trees are arranged for shade, the walls thick enough to block the scorching wind. Somewhere nearby, a fountain trickles, catching the dying light and breaking it into thousands of tiny dancing flames. Someone offers you a chilled drink. You raise it to your lips, expecting warmth, maybe some dusty fruit juice, but no, it's cold. Not icy, but cold enough to jolt you into the present. You glance around. And that's when a thin man in long robes beckons you over. His fingers are stained with saffron, his nails crusted with sugar. "Come," he says, "let me show you something most people miss." He leads you into a shaded colonnade, whispering about the art of sardarkal ceilings made of layered materials, often packed with straw and earth, designed to trap cool night air and insulate it during the day. A natural refrigerator, he explains, for those who knew how to read the land. You follow him down a narrow staircase into a cellar-like chamber. The walls are cool to the touch, built of thick brick. Inside are clay jars, some filled with syrupy fruits, others with a milky rose-scented liquid. "This," he says, "is shabat. We cool it using water drawn from underground kanots." You blink. That word again, kanots. Underground water channels that snake for miles beneath the desert, whispering their way into towns and homes. He tells you about ancient engineers who dug them by hand, lining the tunnels with stone, adjusting the gradient so precisely that water never stagnated, never surged. And here's the real magic. These tunnels stayed cold, year-round, so water stored in the walls of these gardens, or used to chill basements like this one, was always refreshing. Not ice-cold maybe, but enough to calm a fevered body and a dry mouth, as you sip the sharbat, lightly sweetened, faintly tangy, kissed with herbs. You realize that ice wasn't the only goal. The Persians were chasing comfort, and they were architecting it. The garden, the shade, the water channels, the substructures, designed with one shared purpose: to make heat less hostile, to create a haven, a pause in the harshness. And it was all part of a bigger philosophy: harmony with nature, not war against it. You lean against the cool brick and listen to the silence. Even the birds seem to coo in slower rhythms here. The man continues, telling you about ice houses attached to these gardens, smaller yakchils built into garden corners, used more frequently, opened occasionally for special occasions, like the one you just saw. Wealthy families could store enough ice for daily use through midsummer. Sometimes they'd even press flowers into the ice molds for aesthetics. You nearly laugh. Decorative ice, of course, and yet, it doesn't feel frivolous. It feels anciently human, like leaving a fingerprint on the ephemeral. Even their cold had to look beautiful. He leads you back upstairs as dusk deepens. Lanterns flicker along the pathways, casting ripples of gold across the leaves. You notice something adair moving across your face, though there's no breeze. He points upward, a narrow slit in the wall. A badger, Not a fan, not a vent, but a tower that scoops the slightest wind from above and funnels it downward, cooling as it descends. It's the quietest air conditioning you've ever felt. Wind in, heat out, he says, tapping his temple. No electricity, just logic, and logic it is. The badger is angled based on prevailing winds. Some have multiple shafts, some with water pools at the base to humidify dry air. Some connect to the canals, pulling evaporated moisture into living spaces. Historians still argue whether Persians truly invented this or borrowed it from earlier civilizations. But the form perfected here was distinctly their elegant and always practical. The man clasps his hands and bows slightly. This garden, he says, is not made to impress, it is made to heal. You believe him. Everything here seems to breathe more slowly. Even your own thoughts begin to pool, quiet and cool, like the water channels at your feet. Before you go, he hands you a small clay bowl. Inside is a scoop of something white, fluffy, and frozen. Bastani sanati, he murmurs. Traditional Persian ice cream made with saffron, rosewater, chunks of frozen cream, and often a strange chewy ingredient called salep that keeps it stretchy. You take a bite. It's not like modern ice cream, more fragrant than sweet, more texture than sugar, but it's mesmerizing. Like tasting perfume. Like chewing a cloud that remembers the desert. You close your eyes and let it melt on your tongue. And somewhere, in the distance, a fountain sighs. You're still in the garden, but night has fully arrived now. The stars hang above you like icy pinpricks, cold light in the heat of memory. The man with the saffron fingers has disappeared, but the path forward is gently lit by oil lamps set along a narrow channel of flowing water. You follow it. It leads you out of the garden, past stone walls, and back into the desert. But this isn't the lifeless desert of cliché. It's alive in its stillness. You hear the low whistle of wind moving through distant canot vents. You hear the quiet shifting of sand as it settles for the night, and beneath your feet, you begin to notice something unnatural, regular, a dull, rhythmic thud every few steps. You kneel. It's a row of stone markers, each a few meters apart. You brush away the sand from one of them, revealing a narrow circular opening beneath. It's a canot shaft, a vertical maintenance tunnel, leading down into the long underground water system. These shafts dot the land in perfect lines, stretching from the base of the mountains all the way to cities and farms hundreds of kilometers away. You peer down, and a breeze greets you, cold, steady, as if the mountain itself is exhaling. You lie down on the sand and stare upward, letting the cool air drift over your skin. Above you, the sky is ink black and endless. Beneath you, thousands of years of engineering hum silently in the dark. And that's when the story of the canots begins to unfold in your mind, like a scroll being unrolled. Centuries before the birth of modern plumbing, ancient Persian engineers figured out how to tap into the water tables of mountain ranges. They would dig an angled tunnel from the foothills, sometimes dozens of miles long, creating a gentle slope that allowed gravity to pull the water down into cities and gardens, all without pumps or electricity. You picture the workers who built it, men lowering themselves into hand-dug shafts, sometimes 60 feet deep, chiseling tunnels in total darkness. They measured the slope using primitive levels, a string, and sheer repetition. One mistake in the water would stagnate or worse, flood the entire system. Yet they got it right, again and again. For over 2,000 years, some canots are still in use today. And suddenly, it dawns on you. This wasn't just about water, it was about control, about survival, about building a civilization where there should have been none. The canots weren't just clever, they were transformational. They allowed for permanent agriculture in places that received barely 10 inches of rain a year. They enabled the rise of major cities like Yazd and Isfahan, and more to your interest tonight. They were the hidden arteries of cold. At night, the cold air sank into the canots. During the day, it stayed trapped below. When rooted under buildings and through storage rooms, it cooled entire homes. When piped to the actuals, it helped maintain sub-zero temperatures long into summer. The ice didn't just survive, it flowed, and for the first time, you realized the genius wasn't in freezing the water. It was in preserving it, in keeping it sacred. The desert, after all, doesn't care what you build. It only respects what you respect. You rise to your feet. Ahead of you now is a low stone structure shaped like an hourglass tipped on its side. You approach it. It's sealed, save for one small carved inscription above the door. You trace your fingers across it. The old Persian script says only this: "From mountain's gift, kept in silence." You know what lies behind that door. Not treasure, not gold, just a stack of hand-carved blocks of last winter's ice, each one shaped like a brick, each one precious dot, each one destined to become sorbet, or ice cream, or simply water when the time comes. And until then, it sleeps in the dark dot, unmelting dot, unmoved. And, for a few moments, so do you. You lean your shoulder against the smooth, cool surface of the ice vault's stone exterior and close your eyes for just a moment. But then the wind nudges you onwards softly, like a reminder whispered by the night. You turn and begin walking again. The horizon starts to shift, no longer in the harsh, unfiltered expanse of desert. The sand gives way to cobbled streets. Mud walls rise on either side. You're now moving through the heart of an ancient Persian city, perhaps Yazd, perhaps Ray, maybe even ancient Susa itself. It's hard to tell. They've all blurred into this half-dream where past and present shuffle together like dried leaves in a courtyard. You notice something. The air is cooler here than out in the open. That's not just your imagination, it's the architecture. You're walking through windcatcher alleys, narrow streets designed to shade the sun and channel the breeze. Above you, tall towers with slatted openings crown rooftops. These are Badgers, the world's earliest known air conditioning system. Tall, hollow, and elegant, they function by trapping the wind high above and guiding it downward into the building. Some even draw cool air directly from the canots, pushing it through the rooms like a natural ventilation system. No fans, no wires, just air moving because someone long ago understood physics. And now, you find yourself standing beneath one. You tilt your head and listen. There it is, a low moaning whisper. As the breeze funnels downward, you follow it inside. The house is quiet, save for the gentle gurgle of a central fountain. The air inside is dry, cool, and smells faintly of cedar and rosewater. Stone floors beneath your feet absorb the cold, and the thick walls made of clay and straw trap it inside. The temperature here is nearly 20 degrees cooler than outside. It's not a coincidence, it's a plan. You wander into a large room called a shabstana, semi-subterranean chamber designed specifically for summer nights. Down here, the windcatcher meets the air flows in through a duct over a pool of water, cooling as it travels. Before rising through vents, you lie down on the tile floor and imagine sleeping here in July, with nothing but a thin cotton sheet and the sound of trickling water for company. That's when you realize the ancient Persians didn't just beat the heat, they romanced it. They played it like a slow instrument. They danced with its moods, always one step ahead. This wasn't survival. This was elegance. They weren't just trying to stay alive, they were trying to live well. And the frozen deserts, they were the cherry on top, literally. Because at this point, you start noticing something else. Ingredients. You peek into the kitchen and find dried herbs tied in bundles, mint, basil, saffron. You see clay jars filled with syrupy rosewater and grape molasses. You find dried fruits, figs, mulberries, sour cherries, waiting like dusty jewels in open bowls. You see shallow metal dishes lined with linen, ready for faluda, kind of early sorbet, made with vermicelli like rice noodles, soaked in syrup and ice. This was a treat often served during hot festivals, weddings, or as a gesture of high hospitality. And it wasn't reserved for kings, even ordinary households, if they planned carefully and harvested ice from the yak shell, could prepare something like this at least once in a while. It was laborious, yes, but so was baking bread from scratch. It was a ritual, one involving patience, community, and anticipation. And here's the fun bit. Historians still argue whether faluda originated in Persia proper, or in the eastern fringes, maybe, even ancient Balk or Bactria. Some claim it was the precursor to Italian sorbet, by extension, modern ice cream. Others say that's speculative fluff, sweetened by nostalgia and a need to tie everything back to Europe. But no one debates the fact that the Persians were early adopters of the frozen arts. One fringe scholar even claimed that court chefs would pour cooled syrup over slabs of snow, shave it into curls, and sprinkle it with sour plum dust, a kind of proto-icy slushy. Probably delicious, almost definitely sticky. And now, as you lean over the ancient kitchen counter, you imagine holding a bronze bowl filled with that chilled desert, steam rising lazily from the surface in the summer heat. You take a spoonful, and suddenly time collapses. You taste centuries in a bite, the cold, sharp contrast of snow and syrup, the gentle floral note of rose, a hint of salt carried on the breeze, the sound of a badger catching the wind just overhead, and maybe, just maybe, a bell ringing in the distance. Because in the bustling cities of Persia's golden age, vendors would roam the streets with large insulated carts, offering chilled sweets in exchange for a coin or two, the ancient equivalent of the ice cream truck. Just without the creepy jingle. You smile at the thought, and for a moment, nothing moves. The cold bowl in your hands, the still air in the room, the history humming quietly in the walls. You exhale. The wind answers. The wind drifts out through the lattice windows, and you follow it back into the city, back into the city. But you're seeing things differently now. The domes, the towers, the markets, they're still alive. People don't walk here. They glide through heat, the way a fish glides through water and above it, because they understand it. You pass a caravanserai, its thick walls and central courtyard cool despite the midday glare. You peek inside and see travelers sipping chilled water from clay jars, cooled through natural evaporation. One man is rubbing his forehead with a cloth soaked in ice water, a luxury no doubt, because by now you've learned just how precious cold truly was in this world, and how fragile, because the Yakshals weren't just clever, they were vulnerable. A single breach in the insulation, a poorly sealed door, a crack in the Connaught system, and the entire winter's harvest could melt away in hours. That's why there were ice masters, specialized keepers of cold, part architect, part priest, part weather oracle. They monitored the airflow, temperature, and structural integrity of the Yakshal like modern engineers watch servers in a data center. In some cities, they were paid handsomely. In others, they were ignored until the ice ran out. And when that happened, panic, because cold wasn't just a treat, it was medicine. You overhear a story whispered in the alley by an old apothecary. There was once a summer so hot that even the bricks began to sweat. The Shah's son was dying of fever, and only crushed snow with mint and vinegar kept him from burning to death. You can't verify the tale, but you've heard others like it, and in each version, ice equals life. You walk farther now, past the markets, past the tiled mosques, past the poetry halls where young men argue over Rumi and Hefes. You pass children playing with ice chips wrapped in leaves. You see a woman fanning herself beside a clay pot, cooled by a wet cloth. Everywhere, people are working with the heat, not fighting it, and that's when the illusion of time truly breaks, because suddenly you're not in 600 BC, or 900 AD, or even 1500, you're in the present, or maybe just a few decades ago, standing in a village on the edge of the Doshti Kavir. It's morning, the sun has barely risen, but the sand is already warm beneath your feet. A group of engineers, architects, and local volunteers are gathered around the base of something strange and familiar. A dome built from mud bricks. It's a new Yakshal. Someone's trying to bring them back. You watch as they patch the conical walls with a mixture of clay, straw, and ash. A small solar panel powers a temperature sensor embedded in the wall. Nearby, kids fill burlap sacks with snow, carried down from the nearby hills. It's not perfect. The modern world has refrigerators, AC units, and chemical coolants. But this is about something else. Preservation, resilience, a return to thinking, like the earth. You hear one of the engineers say something quietly. We don't need to invent everything again. Some ideas were already good enough, and suddenly it hits you. The ancient Persians weren't behind their time. They were ahead. Their tech was quiet, elegant, sustainable, designed not to overpower nature but to partner with it. And if that's not futuristic, what is? You step closer to the new Yakshal, place your hand on the wall, still warm from the morning sun, but inside, ice is forming, not from wires, not from freon, but from wind, geometry, and patience. You smile because the past didn't disappear, it just waited for us to notice. You turn away from the newly built Yakshal, but the memory of it sticks like the last chill of night before sunrise. You wander farther now, your sandals, or maybe they're just your dream feet tapping against sun-baked stone roads. There's no rush, just the slow stretch of time, like thick honey. You're back in ancient Persia now, though the centuries continue to blur, as they tend to do when you're this sleepy and this far away from modern life. You've followed the ice from the mountains to the desert, from winter harvests to summer deserts. But one thing remains a mystery. How did people share this miracle with the masses? Because it wasn't just the royal kitchens that wanted it. Ice had become a kind of social currency, a status symbol, a celebration. So you head toward the heart of the city once more, the bazaar. And oh, it's alive. Chickpeas roasting, rosewater wafting from copper stills, goats clopping through like they've got shopping to do. But what you're here for is tucked away just past the spice vendors and the rug merchants, and the man trying to convince a very skeptical child that dried apricots are better than candy. You find it a dessert stall, and you're just in time to witness the morning ice drop. A mule arrives carrying bundles wrapped in wool. Inside, packed with sawdust, ash, or straw, are chunks of harvested ice from the actual, still frosty despite the heat. The merchant opens one, chips off a piece with a curved iron tool, and immediately sets to work. Crushed ice, cherry syrup, slivered almonds, maybe even a dash of saffron. This isn't just dessert, it's a miracle in a bowl. It's called Faluda, and it might just be the world's oldest semi-frozen sweet. Starch noodles bathed in rosewater syrup and packed into bowls with freshly crushed snow. The taste is cold, floral, and slightly slippery, like summer itself took a nap in your mouth. And here's the kicker. They weren't just eating ice, they were making ice cream too. Yes, long before Ben and Jerry were arguing over whether to swirl in cookie dough, Persian cooks were chilling milk, honey, and fruit in yakchals to create early versions of bastani, fragrant with saffron, rose, and sometimes even pistachio. Think of it as edible poetry. Now, here's your fringe tidbit of the day. There are reports from ancient Banfru scrolls that a version of this cold desert was served in honor of victorious generals, molded into the shape of their battle helmets. Is that true? Historians still argue whether that was literal or just poetic flair, but either way it paints quite a picture. Imagine a weary general biting into a frozen likeness of his own headgear while a harpist plays softly nearby. Weird flex, but we respect it. You watch children gather, coins clinking in their palms, hoping for a spoonful. A young couple shares one bowl between them, careful not to spill a drop of the syrup, and an old man sits cross-legged near the stall, nodding as he eats his faluda like it's a sacred rite. But what's even more fascinating isn't the dessert, it's the distribution system. These ice deliveries weren't random. They were scheduled, counted, and regulated. Municipal records, some carved into stone, others scratched into clay tablets, show ice allotments for different neighborhoods, often tied to the status of its residents. The wealthier districts got more, but even poorer families were guaranteed a bit, especially during extreme heat. In fact, during Nowruz, the Persian New Year, rice was often given freely as a gift from the state, kind of like holiday turkeys, but 30 degrees colder. The state's involvement in desert. Oh yes, you see, in Persian political theory, a ruler's job wasn't just to protect you from enemies, it was to create balance with nature. That meant funding, irrigation canals, wind catchers, and sometimes even yak hchals, because if your people are fainting in the heat, you're a bad king, even if your beard is majestic. As you sit on the low stone bench, licking a phantom faluda spoon, you realize something sweet. Chilled deserts weren't just a novelty, they were a message, a declaration that humans could negotiate with the elements, that even in the most blistering heat, we could carve out coolness not by force, but by design. And that luxury, at its best, is shared. You lean back, the stall buzzing behind you, the sound of shaved ice crunching, syrup dripping, kids laughing, and somewhere in the background, the low hum of a flute echoing off stone. It's hot, but you're chilled, because you've learned the real secret of Persian ice. It wasn't just cold, it was civility. The flute fades, the dessert stall blurs, and the world shifts again. Now you're in a back alley, a narrow corridor shaded by mud brick walls. Overhead, latticework beams filter sunlight into strips. It's quiet here, too quiet, except for voices arguing. You peek around a corner. Two men, one wears the robes of an ice merchant, the other, a scribe scroll tucked under his arm, eyes darting left and right. They speak in low tones, urgent and clipped. Words like spoiled delivery, missing ice bricks, and tax exemption float through the air. You're not just in the desert chapter anymore. You're in the bureaucracy. Because ice wasn't just for the sweet-toothed. It was a commodity, a tax item, even a weapon of diplomacy. You listen as the scribe accuses the merchant of underreporting his quotas. The merchant fires back, blaming a broken wind catcher in the Yakchal, melted stores, and sabotage by a rival guild. And that's when it hits you. Ancient Persia didn't just build ice houses. They built cold politics. Ice as power in some cities. Ice wasn't free. It was collected, measured, and sold, with pricing tables carved into stone slabs. Depending on the season, the distance from the mountains, and the success of last winter's harvest, ice could cost more than dried figs, sometimes a lot more. And like all valuable things, it created tension. Guilds emerged to control yakshals, licensed only by city magistrates. These groups oversaw ice cutting, transport, storage, and sale. Step out of line and your quota could be revoked. Step too far, and your ice house could be seized. There are scrolls from the city of Yazd detailing a summer dispute between two rival ice guilds. One accused the other of pouring warm water into their yakchal at night, spoiling the inner core, and forcing them to sell soft ice that melted before it reached the bazaar. Was it true? We'll never know. But the city council fined both parties equally, and raised the tax on Faluda for the rest of the year. Ice heists and snow thieves, of course. Not all conflicts stayed political. Some got shady. You learn of ice smugglersmen who'd sneak into mountain storage pits at night and borrow snow meant for temples or nobles. Some even carved tunnels into qanats to tap cool water illegally. They called it white gold. You pass a painted ceramic shard on a merchant's wall showing a cartoonish snow thief being chased by a cat. It's funny now, but it wasn't then. Punishments for ice theft ranged from fines to whippings, and in one extreme case, exile. Because in a place where cold was life-saving, stealing it was treason. But let's pause here. Because not all ice politics were dark. Some were surprisingly diplomatic. The cold gift in a village near Isfahan, tradition held that when two cities settled a border dispute, the losing side was gifted a brick of mountain ice packed in herbs and ash. Why? To symbolize the cooling of tempers. It became so common that poets referenced it in love poems. Let our feud melt like snow, gifted at dawn, soft in the palm, gone before noon. There's even a record of a sultan sending Faluda to a rival court, delivered in a silver box with the note, "Let this sweeten what war has soured." Chilly diplomacy, literally. The law of coldback at the alley. The scribe and the merchant finally reach an agreement. They mark something on a clay tablet, seal it with a thumbprint, and part ways. You follow the scribe. He walks slowly, the weight of the scrolls and the heat pressing into his back, but you notice a faint smile, because at the end of the day, even the cold trade had moments of warmth. He passes a city square. Children play with scraps of shaved ice. An old woman fans herself with dried fig leaves. And just behind the well, a statue that it's worn with time, chipped by centuries, but you recognize the symbol carved into its base, a snowflake held by a lion, the mark of the Royal Ice Syndicate, and beneath it, the inscription, "Let no fire rule unchecked, where the mind has cooled the world." You sit beside it. The stone is warm, but not hot. The shade is just right. Somewhere nearby, someone's crushing more ice for another bowl of failure, and in this moment, under ancient skies and dusty winds, you realize, cold wasn't just a comfort, it was a civil right. The sun dips behind the rooftops of the old city. Shadows lengthen, voices quiet, but you're still awake. Still walking through history. Except now you're not in Persia anymore. You're on the road. A caravan snakes its way along the dry spine of the Silk Route. Camels groan. Bells jingle softly. Traders mutter in tongues you don't recognize. But one wagon is different. It's packed not with silk or spice, but ice. Wrapped in sawdust. Covered in wool. Sealed in a thick clay box. The driver fans it gently with a woven screen, whispering as if to a sleeping child. You ride beside him, and he tells you, "This one's bound for Chang'an. Emperor's cook wants it for almond milk sweets." And just like that, you travel, and so did flavor. How Persian ice knowledge spread by the 5th century BCE. The Persian Empire stretched from the Indus Valley to the Aegean Sea. Their engineers didn't just build palaces and palisades, they built cold qanats, yakchals, wind catchers. These technologies weren't secrets, they were exports. And as Persian influence reached east into Central Asia and west into Egypt and Greece, so did their icy genius. In China, early versions of yakchals appear in Han Dynasty records, though with distinctly local tweaks like ice houses carved into cliff faces to guard against bandits. In Egypt, Nobles of the Ptolemaic period reportedly used imported snow in feasts, and in Rome, well, cold wars in the Roman baths are now in Rome. Marble walls, heated floors, public baths, luxury. But even herein, a city famed for its warmth, there's a chill in the room. Romans were fascinated by cold. They imported snow from the Alps and stored it underground. Wealthy households hired slaves to fetch it daily, and for dessert, snow mixed with fruit syrups, honey, or wine. Sound familiar? Roman writers argued over how best to preserve the ice. Should it be wrapped in flax, stored in straw, sealed in tar? They never quite cracked it, but the inspiration, it came, partly, from the East. A cold arms race historians believe that Persian refrigeration technology created a kind of climatic envy. Empires without it tried to mimic it, sometimes successfully, sometimes hilariously. One Egyptian ruler reportedly demanded an entire mountain's worth of snow be carted to his court. Most of it melted in transit, but he insisted his guests pretend it was still cold because cold had become imperial theater. To rule the world, it seemed, you had to control its temperature. Chilled philosophical thinkers got involved. Greek philosophers debated whether cold was a substance, or merely the absence of fire. Some believed ice had a spiritual quality able to cool anger and tame desire. You find a scroll with a fragment of a Stoic poem. When the heart burns with longing, lay it beneath frost, and let it learn stillness. The Persians didn't just give the world architecture or astronomy, they gave it a feeling that even in heat there could be restraint. Even in deserts, there could be delicacy. Ice's quiet invasion back in the caravan. The driver nods off. The desert night cools. The stars blink silently. And in the stillness, you realize Persian cold didn't conquer with armies. It slipped silently across borders in clay pots, in syrups, in bowls of chilled rosewater. It taught other empires something vital. You don't need snow to master ice. You need knowledge, and patience, and a really well-built dome. You climb out of the wagon. In the distance, a city glows, not with fire, but with a quiet, steady, cool. You step into the glowing city ahead. It smells of spice and steam, soot and sugar. You're not quite sure what century it is anymore, because now, time folds in on itself like a pastry shell. Persia is no longer an empire. It's a memory woven into recipes, whispered in kitchens, and melted into every icy dessert around the world. The wind is softer here, the moon brighter. You walk past a child licking something that could only be described as ancient sorbet. She smiles, sticky-cheeked, and points to the building behind her. You follow her finger. The sign says, Saray Shirini, which loosely translates to, House of Sweetness, and inside, time collapses like a flan in the sun. Ice in the Islamic, golden azure in Baghdad, now 9th century CE. The libraries stretch farther than the eye can see. Candlelight dances on inkwells and scholars whisper beneath rows of manuscripts. But the kitchens hum with their own sort of genius. This is the era of the Abbasid Caliphate, a time when Persian knowledge is being translated, tested, and elevated. And that includes cold. The actuals have gotten smarter. Some now use layers of reed matting between bricks to improve insulation. Others integrate algebraic calculations to optimize dome size and vent height. Yes, that's right somewhere. An engineer in a dusty robe is literally doing cold math. And what are they chilling? Almond milk and rice flour puddings, rose and orange blossom syrups, sharbats thick with pomegranate, mint, or tamarind, and even iced carrot drinks sweetened with honey. You sip one. It tastes like velvet dipped in snow. The Caliph's cold command legend, says one Caliph was so obsessed with cold drinks that he ordered ice delivered from Mount Lebanon every 10 days even in the blistering summer. Caravans would leave in the dead of night, packed with snow wrapped in burlap, stuffed with straw and wool, doused in vinegar to delay melting. It was a logistical miracle, pre-modern refrigeration at scale. And still, historians argue whether this was practical or pure pomp. Some say it was just a tale, exaggerated by poets trying to flatter the court. Others claim to have seen the ledgers, the receipts for snow. Whether true or not, the point remains. Cold was not just luxury anymore, it was status. Knowledge melts westward as the Islamic world expanded. So did these cold techniques. Spain, under the Moors, began experimenting with sweet iced concoctions during the 10th century. During the 10th century, by the 11th, Sicilian monks were making granitas, with snow collected from Mount Etna, combining Persian theory with Mediterranean flair. You're suddenly walking through a hillside abbey. A monk hands you a dish, lemon, honey, and snow. You take a bite. The cold is soft, not sharp, and that's when it hits you. This entire dessert exists because someone in Persia once decided to cool a dome with wind. Fringe theory, camel milk ice cream. Okay, deep breath. You pass a firelit circle of travelers swapping tales. One grizzled old trader swears up and down that he once tasted camel milk ice cream in an oasis village outside Yazdi. He describes it like this: it was the color of sand, the texture of butter, and it made me cry for home. Historians are divided on whether this was real or just the dehydrated ramblings of a tired man with heatstroke. But in modern Yazat, you can buy a version of it today, flavored with pistachio, cardamom, and a touch of saffron. We'll never know if that old trader was telling the truth, but the story is just as sweet. Ice as poetry. You return to the Serai Shirini and lean on a cool marble table. A poet sits across from you. His fingers are stained with ink and syrup. He scribbles something on a scrap of parchment, then hands it to you. Some seek fire to warm the soul. I seek frost to quiet it. You nod, because now you get it. This whole journey through deserts, over mountains, across centuries, has been about more than just cooling desserts. It's been about taming fire with stillness, about turning the unbearable heat of life into something delicate, something delicious. You step out of the Serai Shirini, your tongue still tingling from the lingering chill of rose ice. The night air smells like cardamom and old secrets. You keep walking, because the story isn't over yet. The Mongols bring snow to China. The year is now 1275. You've wandered east into the heart of Yuan dynasty China. Kublai Khan is emperor. His court is a strange, glittering mix of Mongol, Chinese, Persian, and Turkish influences. You're in his kitchens, watching chefs in thick woolen aprons shovel snow into bronze pots. They're making frozen milk tea. This isn't the bubble tea, you know. It's thick yak cream mixed with tea leaves and sweetened with plum syrup, churned with ice pulled down from the mountains. Some historians argue the Mongols may have taken ideas of snow deserts from the Persians and combined them with their own love for fermented dairy. Others say the Chinese had already been chilling fruit juices using snow centuries earlier, especially in the Tang and Song dynasties. Either way, what's in front of you is astonishing. A milky, cold, whisperingly smooth drink. You sip it. It tastes like snow melting on velvet. Marco Polo steals nothing, sorry to disappoint. Contrary to legend, Marco Polo did not bring ice cream back from China. There is no evidence of any such recipe in his writings, no mention of sherbets or iced creams. The myth was cooked up centuries later by overeager Europeans, trying to credit one man for a global phenomenon. But while Marco didn't bring back a recipe, he did bring back curiosity. He described lavish Chinese banquets, ice-packed cellars, and chilled fruit wines. Europe listened, then it planted a seed. The Renaissance freezes over, you drift. Now to 16th century Italy. It's Florence, or maybe Naples. The Medici kitchens are humming, and a man named Bernardo Buontalenti is testing a strange new concoction. Milk, honey, egg yolks, and a snow salt mixture to freeze it. Some claim he invented gelato. Others say he merely refined older Arabic techniques and gave them a new Italian name. Does it matter? You're handed a silver spoon. You taste saffron and orange peel. It's creamy, cold, slow. Suddenly, the voices fade. The palace dims. Time seems to swirl like chilled custard in a copper bowl. You're floating now in a sleep so soft it feels churned. Cold comes to France, the court of Louis XIV was obsessed with spectacle. Noble served frozen orange flower ice in ice swans at a banquet. Another disguised lemon granita inside hollowed-out lemons, studded with cloves. In 1671, the French court recorded the first recipe for fromage glace, a frozen cheese made of cream, sugar, and egg yolks. Why call it cheese? Because they molded it in cheese molds. Why not? You're handed a bite. That it tastes like chilled clouds and sugar-coated pomp, and somehow it's still not quite ice cream. Not yet, but we're close. The curious case of the saltpeter chef in London. A street vendor named Mrs. Mary Eels began selling a mysterious delicacy, ice cream, Her 1718 cookbook contains one of the earliest English-language ice cream recipes, calling for sugar, orange flower, water, and cream, iced in a tub, of saltpeter and ice. Saltpeter, also known as potassium nitrate, was used as a cooling agent in place of ice in warmer climates. It lowered the temperature of water so efficiently that even without snow, frozen deserts could be made. You imagine her, sleeves rolled up, hands sticky, stirring cream in a brass bowl, surrounded by fizzing saltpeter. A crowd gathers. Whispers spread. Ice cream in the streets of London. A scoop for sleep. You're no longer sure what continent you're on. You're drifting between palaces, pyramids, mountain caves, and street carts. A child laughs nearby, chasing a cart bell. Someone hums a lullaby in Arabic. A monk refills your bowl in silence. A poet folds a napkin into a swan. And suddenly, you understand something that no scholar ever wrote down. The history of ice cream isn't about cold, it's about comfort. The wind changes. A new smell rises, coffee maybe, and with it a new story stirs. But for now, let the snow settle in your mind. Let the old recipes curl around your dreams. Let the world soften like sorbet in sunlight. Good night. You walk slowly now, your steps muffled by the soft dust of the Persian earth beneath your feet. The night has grown cooler, not just in temperature, but in spirit. It feels like the world itself is winding down, stretching its ancient bones beneath a dome of quiet stars. Off in the distance, that familiar silhouette curves upward against the horizon, the Yakchul, still standing, still breathing in silence. You approach it again, as you did in the beginning, but something's different this time. The air feels thicker, a faint breeze slips past you, and you could almost believe it came from the dome itself. Like the last exhale of an old story, you circle the structure one more time, tracing its strange geometry, its cracked but proud walls. Maybe they've cradled snow older than empires. Maybe they've held sorbet destined for kings who never showed up to the feast. You touch the surface, cool to the touch, even now, and feel like you're touching the spine of time itself. Inside, the ice slumbers. Not literally, of course, but don't you want to believe that maybe it dreams a little? That as it slowly shifts and sighs in its subterranean nest, it remembers the mountain streams it once flowed through. The laughter of servants who packed it tightly by moonlight. The startled gasp of a Khaldi tasting frozen honey for the first time. Historians still argue whether the Yakchuls were ever meant to last this long. Some think their survival is luck. Others believe it's intention, clever design, married to ancient respect for balance, climate, and patience. But deep down, part of you suspects there's something more, something subtle, a whispered pact between man and nature to keep coldness alive, even where it doesn't belong. And now, you lie back beside it, the stone cooling the warmth from your back. The stars blink slowly overhead, unsure whether you're still awake. Around you, the world has quieted into a soft lull, like the end of a long breath, or the space between dreams. Your eyelids feel heavy now, like curtains slipping closed on a long-forgotten play. The Yakchul rests behind you, distant and blurred, its strange outline folding into the night like a memory. The air has grown still, no more footsteps, no more wind, just the occasional hush of sand shifting somewhere in the darkness, a sound so gentle it might only exist in your imagination. Everything slows, every thought you have takes longer to form, like it's moving through honey. Even your breath lingers in your chest before slipping out, soft and smooth, like vapor on ice. You remember the mountain meltwater, the domes, the cold sorbet and warm arguments. But now, those thoughts don't ask to be held. They drift past like lazy clouds, not needing attention, not needing answers, just there to be noticed and then let go. Let them go. Let the hum of the Yakchul fade. Let the echoes of ancient footsteps grow faint. Let the frozen deserts, the underground canals, the marble bowls of snow and surapol melt into the gentle quiet of your mind. No need to chase anything. Not now, not here. You are still, you are calm, and you are far, far away. Good night.